a couple minutes introducing you to our team here at APA Solutions. So we have present with us Kristen Obarka, who is joining us and is going to be monitoring the chat room very closely. Hopefully, everyone is familiar at this painful point in history on how to get to the chat box when it comes to a Zoom. So certainly feel more than free to go to the bottom of your screen. And I know that Kristen is going to be prompting us and asking us questions and comments throughout our time together. So we very much encourage that activity because we love to customize even our webinars in a way that is meaningful for as many people as possible. It looks like the bulk of our participants today are from Western and Central New York, some in the Canadian region as well, so we welcome you. Jean Filipiak is our in-house behavioral specialist, and she also heads up our recruiting division. And so from a researcher perspective, she is the individual that consistently monitors the trends as it comes to identification, so that we traditionally will see that as almost like our first line of defense. And that makes us very much aware about some of the human capital challenges and triumphs that we're going to be seeing coming down the channel, in that identification and the talent shortage tends to be very indicative of that experience. So we appreciate her today, who's not here with us, but is always in positivity and good spirits, is our in-house neuroscientist, Eric Nealens. So certainly we're going to be referencing him from a database perspective throughout our time together. So we welcome everyone, and we're going to immediately get into that chat question and encourage you to go there. So we'd love to know from our participants today, if you can go right into the chat room and say, what brought you here today? What was it about this particular topic that brought you and interested you to have and spend your time with us today? I am Joan Gracie. I am the president of APA Solutions. We are a third-generation company that works within the life cycle of the employee experience, from identification, retention, development, and outplacement. And I'll be your tour guide for what I am going to safely say. This is, I would say, the largest shift that we have seen when it comes to people within the workforce. There are many different reasons why I say that to you today, and it's not something that I share with you as a point of a soundbite or exaggeration. I think when we get into this, we are very much going to see why the whole human nature of us as a species is being almost conjoined in a variety of really important and dynamic ways. And I think in our time together, what our hope is, as a brain-based organization, as one of the half a dozen firms in the country that works with neuroscientists that have looked at the brain at work, from high-res MRI machines to data collection, to research, to extensive studies. What we very much pride ourselves on is helping growth companies make data-based decisions versus using your particular perspective as a tool, and only that as a tool, We often fall prey to the frailties of our human nature, which we're certainly going to be chatting about today, which is why when you work with scientists like Kristen, like Eric, like David Rock, they very much push on what is the evidence? Can you prove what your opinion is through a fact-based example? So we're interested about, what's brought you here today. Again, what was it about this particular topic? We're now back to school, which is a very exciting time for us. We run on the same type of calendar that a traditional college and university would, almost to that September to that end of May, very early of June with our in-house classes. So this very much allows us to, really delve into the importance of why considering how your worldview might be helping or hindering you being the best leader, the best version of yourself, or whatever the case may be. So as Kristen is continuing to kind of crunch that data and kind of getting a sense as to who we have within the confines of our virtual audience, I want to kick off this whole face of the American workforce, because often as we're going through our daily activities, we don't have the time to really be thinking about what's going on in the world around us. And the face of the American workforce, again, is at such a unique and unusual time, in that when you look at the state of immigration, when you look at the state of natural and very organic diversity, it is clear that the amount of different cultures and experiences that have bled into our workforce is now at a record proportion. And in thinking about that dynamic, when we're looking at, Jean, if I could just trouble you for a moment, just to kind of stay on this slide for just a minute here, and then we'll get more into the granular piece of it. We then have very much that generational. This is the first time in our history that we have every generation represented in the workforce, from the Ys and Zs to very much having those baby boomers holding very steady in terms of our employment rankings. I don't think that we give enough thought and consideration to, especially when we're in New York State, when we're in Toronto, when we're in Calgary, when we're in California, when we're in New York City. You see a real richness and respect for the impact that technology and AI is having within the confines of our human capital. We don't hear as much conversation around that in Western and Central New York, but it is absolutely impacting the way people are viewing work in monumental ways. Remote and flexible work, and how so much of the younger generation see work from a perspective that's very different than even the millennial generations and the generations that came before that. In this gig economy, I don't think that we're given enough thought and consideration, again, in the bulk of where our participants are coming from today, about how a laptop and a bedroom can now become these offices, and how many people in the younger generations are skeptical of businesses, are skeptical of corporations, and therefore have decided to be their own bosses, and what that has meant to, again, identifying, retaining, and development of talent. So I want to lead this very much with thinking and challenging you to consider, when you think about the workforce, whether it be recruiting, do you think about that the face of who you are trying to attract looks very different. And are you identifying people from a traditional perspective, your traditional perspective? And is that even relevant to what a buyer, let's say in this case, a job seeker, often passive, is even interested in thinking and seeing? When you do identify a person, do you spend the time to really look at your organization as a whole and say, where are our weaknesses? Where are our strengths? And how perhaps can we use this opportunity to be more diverse? And that might be diversity of thought, because what we find often in an identification is that people hire their in group. They are attracted to people who answer questions like them, that often act like them. Again, as a brain-based organization, we know that that is just a natural inclination. But do you have processes in place so you make sure you don't fall prey to that? And have you considered a remote worker in a different perspective than you ever have before, or somebody from the gig economy or contractual? Again, our goal with every webinar is to hope that we take you to the rainbow. And what that means for us is giving you a thought to think about and consider, so that when that happens, your brain tends to light up in those very beautiful ways, because it's taking you out of your perspective and it's asking you to think about something that perhaps you haven't thought of or considered in the past. So, Jean, as we run on to that next slide, we wanted to give you more of a granular sense of where we are in terms of the different groups, the underrepresented groups, and how they continue to grow and look different. And again, are we thinking about that representation? Are we thinking about how that might fit? Once we identify that person, what we're definitely seeing in onboarding is that there isn't a lot of consideration for how do we help this person who is culturally diverse to feel comfortable within the confines of our organization. Have we designed an onboarding system where most people have surfboarding systems, to be brutally candid? That's what the data shows, to make people feel welcome, to make them feel at ease during a neurological time that tends to be very scary for all generations. When you start a new position, even though you might have a level of excitement to do so, the brain always prefers being able to predict its future. And going into a new company where you don't know the people, you don't know the norms, you don't know the values, not really familiar in depth with who you're going to be working with and who you're going to be working for, we see how threatening that is for us. And again, are we considering that as part of wanting to have an equitable and fair footprint across our organization? So, Jean, I'd love to kind of, from your perspective, get your thoughts, because you're so ingrained in listening so closely in your intake about these type of questions. And I know you've done and had a lot of uncertainty around this particular topic. Do you find that the bulk of the companies that you're creating a job order for, is they're looking for an impact performer, is still very much following the traditional protocol?
They're following a traditional protocol or leading with technical skills as opposed to the attributes that they look for in individuals. And those attributes can really kind of like play off of this first slide, is really having the ability to understand diversity, the ability to understand generational norms. And it's not that they'll say it in a job posting or the intake, but it's an open conversation that they have with me, of being transparent with me and saying, we don't know how to find these people. We don't even know how to engage with these people in general in order to put an impact performer on our organization. So diversity would be a win for them, but they don't have anything in their toolbox to help them expand their diversity initiatives. And then to your point, Joan, in this work world, I would say it goes back since the technology revolution. We are just working harder, smarter, and faster and trying to do better. And these trends that you're mentioning, and then looking at who encompasses the workflow or work environment, I would only think has leaders very concerned on how to manage them, once I find them, how do I expand my leadership capabilities to retain them? So the questions kind of always go from recruiting to retention because of the what a talent shortage is out there.
Okay. So I think that as we continue, Jean, that kind of leads us to, often it can be intimidating for a layman to look at our organization and see descriptions like brain-based, neural leadership. I mean, that can be incredibly like, what does this all mean? And so, what I can assure you is that although we work with scientists, everything that we do from a training perspective is brought down to the level of understanding, regardless of what your educational level is, where you're starting from. So we're very fortunate that Eric is incredibly open-minded to the integrity of our programs and using metaphors, as long as, again, we're making sure that it's communicated in such a way that is true to what the math and science is saying about this very complicated entity. Our brain has this overwhelming responsibility, and it is to keep you protected, safe from harm. It will use its senses. It could use its sight, its sound, smells, a variety of the ways in which, again, these amazing orifices work for you. And it will then work within the confines of your collection of nature and nurture. So from the point that you were in the womb, you started a collection or a footprint that had been donated to you, not only from your parents, but your grandparents, but your great great grandparents. There is evidence now of finding multi generations downloaded in your particular perspective that were put in there for the noblest of intentions. And that was to keep you protected. So if your great great grandparents were on the breadline, or they endured war or some other type of trauma, it didn't start with you. That's one of my favorite books. It very much was downloaded so that when you see that, when you hear that, when you read about that, it is not unusual for you to have a neurological impact, not based on a firsthand experience, but it could have been a fourth-hand experience. So understanding that no two brains are alike, that you are a product of your nature, of your family unit, of your environment, whether it be through education, whether it be through your education, whether it be through your friends, whatever the case may be, makes this so complicated. Because as you're looking out in the world in what we fondly refer to as a filing cabinet, because the brain loves this very monumental, very much that we can identify, even in the younger generations, this physical entity. When we're asking the whys and the these about a filing cabinet, they might not use it a lot, but they certainly know what it is. And they understand when you open that drawer, there's organizers in it, there's file folders in it. And that then becomes a seamless way by which you engage with the world. It doesn't take a lot of thought. And if we put you into a high-res MRI machine, what we would definitively see is darkness. When you are using this auto response throughout your daily activities, it doesn't require a lot of energy. It just uses the patterns that you've established from your past, and it makes predictions about what to pull from this organized profile to use in an engagement at work, in your personal life, whatever the case may be. So often, especially when we talk to leaders, they have this overwhelming assumption that they're very present and that they're coming up with all of these new ideas on an ongoing basis. But that would be overwhelming. That's why we drive the same way to work. That's why often we can't even remember how we got to work unless there's been some type of problem on our way into work or on our way home from work. These very much become our habits. And so when we talk about the formation of the work that we do, there is nothing that we do without a self-awareness lens. And what I'm curious about, Kristen, is as you're looking in the chat room, as you're kind of identifying some of these trends and kind of getting a sense of what was it that brought people here today? Any questions, any comments that you can share that I can make sure that as I can put in these bite-sized pieces, I'd love to be able to do that.
Yeah, so it was, kind of almost like a curiosity of learning, just other perspectives, helping their team, the effect that EQ can have on turnover, all those kind of ideas were coming up.
Okay, wonderful. So as we look at that next slide, the question that I'd like you to give thought and consideration to over, what is the remainder of like our next 40 minutes together is, it is incredibly difficult not to look at yourself from a place of self-judgment. We're actually designed that way. It's incredibly difficult to look at others that are different than you from a place of non-judgment. We're designed that way. We have 5.5 times more real estate dedicated to the threat region of our brain than we do reward. So it's natural for us to have those type of thoughts and activities as a result of our natural resources. But if you recognize and if you accept, which often from a scientific standpoint, we don't, because the word emotions, it's very interesting when you put somebody in a high-res MRI machine, often is incredibly negative based on more of our societal norms. We see this very much in men, whereas they are expected not to have emotions or to show emotions. And there's a direct line with masculinity to emotions. So there's a lot of confusion of, well, how can I be a strong man and still have these outward emotions? Because most people are not familiar with the fact that when you have an emotional outburst, that is just your brain's way of giving you a nudge and saying, hey, this is important to you. This person, this place, this thing, this is important to you. So contrary to popular belief, we are an emotional brain that thinks. We are not a thinking brain that is emotional. And often that gets confused. So when you look at an emotional or a self-awareness journey from a perspective of how do I get to be a happier version? How do I get to be a healthier version? Instead of saying, oh my gosh, you know what? I should have known this, or why can't I do better at this? And this very much goes back to the work that Carol Dweck did in terms of looking at the fixed mindset, that darkness I described to you, versus the growth mindset. And what you see from the most evolved leaders today is that often what they do is they have a particular goal in mind. And what we're seeing post-pandemic is most individuals want to be in some form of coaching. Like they would love to be able to be the intermediary to educate people how to be the best versions of themselves, not to diminish emotions, because that's like asking somebody not to breathe. That's like asking somebody not to digest food. We would never do that. But yet, often, because of our societal norms, unlike a lot of Scandinavian countries, we don't embrace emotions, honor them. And then when they lead us down a path that could be stress-oriented or unfortunate, ruin relationships, controversy, figure out this emotional outburst. How do I calm my nervous system? How do I work within my unique design? How do I become more educated so that I can diminish this, although recognizing and understanding it's important to me, but solving this outbreak in a way that's really rewarding and fulfilling, not only for me, but certainly for the people that I lead or the people that are my peers or my supervisor, whatever the case may be, my personal relationships, having this knowledge base and what a difference it makes. So as we think about that, I want to share with you that when you are looking at the way that the world is moving, and I said to you when we kicked off our hour that we are changing at a pace unlike we have ever seen in the world's history. And for our brain, that's a real challenge because we're a pattern making machine. We love to make, I think of when I say this, Diane von Furstenberg, that all she did was that wrap dress. She just did a wrap dress. It might have been a long sleeve wrap dress. It might have been a short sleeve wrap dress. It doesn't matter. She just had a pattern for a wrap dress. And rarely did she go beyond that particular pattern. So we are prone to consistently use our past. And now what we see is all of these things coming at us like meteors. I mean, they are just absolutely coming towards us at such a record pace. And you see this in absenteeism. You see this in mental strifes. You see this in engagement levels. I mean, there's just a variety of things that are just coming at us that we were not designed for. Keep in mind, we were designed very simply if we look at archival ancestry. So technology, the skill shortage, economic, our geopolitical landscape, the climate, the consumer is so much different. Our buyer is so much different today. Even if you're in a nonprofit, and that's social. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, well, you know what? You are absolutely positively normal. I have been following the data largely because I have one of these. My daughter is a young mother, and they can relate back to the stress that young mothers are enduring because they are so ensconced in Instagram and other social media that what they're downloading in their filing cabinet is a image that this particular influencer has got it all going on as a mother. In most cultures, there are several people that actually raise a child. Only in America is there very few caregivers. Often it's a parent and maybe a daycare or perhaps a grandparent, but literally the term "it takes a village to raise a child" came from the fact that in the world, in most instances, they count on a village to raise a child. So you have all the responsibility of trying to make this child a good citizen, along with then an image that you're downloading in your filing cabinet that actually has no reality in it. And they are seeing direct correlations to the highest level of parental stress based on trying to be something that really doesn't even have a sense of reality to it. So it's just so fascinating how we can create these stories and ideas in our mind. And all it does is it just gives more stress to us in a time that's so stressful to begin with. So it's just, again, important how we better understand that as it relates to our design. So when you look at how the workforce started and how small the incremental change was, every year there was almost just these very subliminal, minute changes. In the past year, there has been a 33% in that previous slides changes. When Jean referred to, she used the word working faster and smarter. Well, I don't think that smarter should be included in that, because often what we're seeing, and we're actually going to be talking about it in our next webinar, we have an efficiency expert that we partner with, in that so much of the time when we go to work is controlled by outside forces. The record levels of meetings that have no agenda, that have no goal and have no outcome, but often just another meeting. We have been literally looking at the data as it relates to senior level leaders' weekly schedule, and we are able to say, in manufacturing, in information technology, in medical, from the companies that we have poured through the data, commercial construction, people are able to do their key functions an average of 2 days a week. That means that there are 3 days that are literally lost on a variety of different processes and projects that don't have to do with the primary function that we have. That is scary. And a lot of this relates back to that incremental change that is all coming at us. We are feeling so overwhelmed personally and professionally. And what we see as an outcome of that is by Friday, people are exhausted. And they don't feel great about what they accomplished because they haven't even put the pen to paper to figure out, well, they couldn't accomplish everything that they would because the business or their job or their company or some other outside forces is running them. Rarely do you see that people are starting a month and saying, this was my goal as part of an annual goal, and my outlook schedule is going to be indicative of 9/12 of the year because I have only got a few months to close out my annual goals and achieve it. So it's just fascinating when we think about how much we have stacked against us, and then coming to terms with what is it that we can do about it. How can we then move towards getting to a solution to this issue? And how we prescribe to this is very much in a similar way than a medical intervention. Whether you're seeing your general practitioner, whether you've been, had the unfortunate experience of having symptoms that you're worried is leading to an unfortunate diagnosis, all that to say, there's some type of intervention that has to happen. If we asked you to identify your strengths, I promise you, your brain is so littered with bias. I know it's hard to believe, but literally hundreds of biases exist within each one of us. We don't want to claim them. We want to say, no, we aren't biased. We don't fall prey to that, but that's literally a scientific impossibility. It's just our human design. It was created for the ease of recognizing who is in our in group, because that kept us safe, versus who is in our out group, because that meant danger. And again, we can go right back to the cave people for that. So in doing a skills inventory, we work with neuroscientists who have designed an assessment that our research has validated. 93.2% of the population who take this assessment can say, wow, this resembles me. And when they give that assessment to someone they love, the other percentage, if they said, no, that's not me, usually their personal friend relationship of some way, shape, or form says, oh, it is you, because we all suffer from blind spots. We are well-intended. We want to believe that our work and our intentions are of the noblest, but often we don't understand how we say things could be interpreted in a way that's negative, although we don't mean it. How we literally could be scaring people just from our facial features, just from the lilt of our voice, just from how quickly we move. I mean, these are just things that we wouldn't know or recognize without taking a deep dive in this way. So we do this skill inventory, which then spits out a multifaceted report that gives you a sense of what your footprint is. So similar to any type of medical interventions, whether it's blood work, whether it's a CAT scan or whatever it is, you get a baseline. What's very, very similar when we're looking at the type of work we do. So as you get a better sense of what that looks like, you can continue, Jean.
So we're okay. So
Thank
we'll
you.
get you.
So it explores through that tool your human design, natural frailties. Like in pop culture, we will often hear things like, I'm not biased. I don't stereotype. These are things that I just don't fall prey to. And again, scientific impossibility. How and what and where are your relationships with your emotions? How well do you do in honoring your emotions versus trying to bring them down? What we see in especially white men causes a very strong reaction for me, in that when you are looking at, I think the latest data is 45 to 62, we are at the highest level of white men committing suicide since we've been tracking those numbers, which is incredibly concerning. And I think it very much goes back to this whole masculinity. And now with all of the things that are coming at us, it was very, very simple when I was a caveman, because I was the hunter. I was the gatherer. This is what my duty and responsibility is. But now look at how many different roles we're actually responsible for. And I just had this conversation with a man who's president of a very large law practice. And he was talking about the younger generations and how in tune they are with their feelings and how uncomfortable he was with that. And he used words to describe them that, again, it caused me to wonder how much he uses that language with that particular generation and what the outcome of that is. Because my grandson is in preschool, and now 4 times a month, they have a person coming into the preschool talking about emotions once a week at 4 years old. So clearly, as we're looking at, preschools that are very much recognizing our design, especially as a wee one, they are immediately trying to diminish the stigma around our human nature and bringing this more mainstream just based on so many of the outcomes. When you're looking at the police force, and how many individuals we've lost to suicide within the confines of that particular occupation, the trauma that they've endured, and then feel bad because it's not something that they can get over, like, changing their uniform. We're not designed that way. Trauma embeds itself very, very deep within the confines of our neurological makeup. So all of this to say, and Jean, I don't know if you want to kind of add on to this as you're our in-house behavioral specialist, but you're going to be walking away with very much your footprint so that you are in a position to look at yourself from more of a place and space of acceptance and not judgment, self-education, self-love versus self-loathing. And I just think having our human nature designed within the confines of this, it's just been so interesting. I was so humbled to literally get a letter. I'm and not used to seeing a handwritten letter today from an individual who was married to a gentleman who had been in foster care his entire life and had never had been in a home for any length of period of time where he could set roots, and how that was playing out in their marriage, and how the filing cabinet, just that imagery, and what he downloaded over the course of those incredibly important formative years was impacting their marriage, where she thought it had something to do with her, not recognizing how his worldview was a product of his experiences, and often very traumatic and unfortunate, especially again during a very important time of him growing up. So that was something that, that knowledge could make such a difference to how you're engaging in any way, shape, or form that you're using your brain. So Jean, your thoughts, your comments.
So as a behavioral specialist, when you see the rapid change that's happening in our new world, behaviorally in complements with the brain, most people are resistant to change as humans. And then you have behavioral styles that reinforce that not wanting to change or implement that change. And I just love this slide and the slide before that, because of technology, we can measure these things, right? Where before, small companies, big companies now have access to these assessments, and we can take a deeper dive in how we do what we do. So those are your behaviors. And then we could take a deeper dive into what truly motivates me and see it in black and white on paper, and then being able to name it and then call it, and then get a stronger sense of self through that process when you take that inventory through understanding your true behaviors overall, and how it relates to your occupation, how it relates to your duties and responsibilities. Because I always come back to, how does emotional intelligence help me with conflict resolution when I avoid conflict all the time? And that just knowing that, wait a minute, my behavioral style prefers not to hit the conflict dead on. So what tools do I need to put in place in order to enhance my emotional intelligence and my conflict resolution? So having the tools at our fingertips are more readily, and I feel more mainstream because technology allows us to do that.
Yeah, and I think, and that's why I was so curious at the beginning. And Kristen, I don't know if you wanna chime in, like, what was it that brought us here today? And I think, better understanding the theory of emotional intelligence. Again, it's one of those terms that sounds a little daunting. When I look at it really simple, in that we don't have enough understanding, which I consider the intelligence piece, around emotions and how important they are to us from both a protection mode and from a very positive mode. I mean, we're very comfortable sharing happy emotions. We're very comfortable being around people that share happy emotions. But these negative emotions, somehow, shape, or form, have kind of gone to the side of being inappropriate. Like, I swear I can remember my mother, from the point I was a wee one, saying to me, "You're too emotional, you're too passionate, you need to drill that down." And being taught that again from a very, very young age. And my mom was in the medical profession and spent her whole career in that way. And I would only imagine that she wouldn't say that today, had she still been with us, because we know more about the brain at work than at any point in history. And that's just such an advantage for us. And I look to these organizations like Wegmans that are in our Western New York community, and how they work within biology and math and psychology and behavioral psychology and organizational development. And everything that they do is data informed. From the benefits that they offer to engagement surveys, I mean, they are consistently collecting data to make good decisions. They don't rely on Colleen Wegman's filing cabinet. They make database decisions. So, Kristen, your thoughts and feedbacks as you're kind of noodling all of this.
No, I think what you kind of are starting to get into is almost having, like, when you approach that change, when you approach this, looking at yourself, through this lens of self-awareness, that, you really have to come with that growth mindset of being willing to say, yeah, you know what, that's me, but not yet. Not yet.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that when you talk, and it was interesting because I picked up in the chat room that somebody said they picked up on those very incremental pieces, right? And they're like, this self-talk, I mentioned this sentence, I mentioned the senses at the beginning of our hour. And I talked about how they very, very much act like this filter to that interaction and that next step in your predictability model. And that self-talk, I would challenge everybody to be leaving our conversation today and be closely listening to what it is you're telling yourself. You see again in Carol Dweck's work how she uses that "not yet," because to the brain that signifies that I have room to go, I have room to grow, but I do it from a place of reward, not from a place of threat. I want to emphasize that when you use that threat region of the brain, it was designed for protection. It was not designed for growth. It was only designed for fight or flight, escape. So understanding that that's where you're getting that self-talk from. If you're truly looking to grow as a person, then you are looking then for an opportunity. That self language is going to be incredibly important. And pre-pandemic, when we brought in Wendy Suzuki, who has her PhD in neuroscience, but specializes in exercise and how important that is to the general health of our brain. Often we exercise because we want to be able to see it. We might want to fit into this dress, or we want to look or feel a certain way. But again, to the brain, that very, very much is a way in which to work with our design. Again, go back to our ancestries and how important that was to our general well-being. But today, it's so cosmetic. We have that very confused about what a great deposit that is to our brain budget. And so much of what we consider kind of like a spa visit or a self-love thing, we think isn't necessary, when that's such an amazing deposit to your brain budget. We are really good at brain withdrawals. We are terrible at brain deposits because we are so out of sync with what our human design is. So all of our in-person classes right now are committed to. We actually start next week. So 2 of our coursework in person at our office in Williamson, New York is taken. We do have 2 openings left in October, and then that is sold out. But we do have this virtual session that is coming up. And Kristen, can I trouble you because you don't have the dates on here? I think that's September 24th, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, so September 24th is when we're going to be starting that virtual session. please do not hesitate to email Kristen if you would like any information about that. And if anybody is interested in a test drive and just kind of wants to go through this first session with us, we always do something on the other side as far as offering some type of experiential learning, because again, that's what the brain prefers, to see what is this all about in real time for me. Does this make sense? So if this is something that you are interested in, again, don't hesitate to send Kristen a note on that. We tend to always give away a few. And what we ask you to do is just part of that, because obviously the whole series is something that, companies pay their employees to experience. We do in that first class some data research because we want to make sure that we have some good information as a result of you being part of that. So in being part of a case study is something we would ask you to do. And this is just something Eric is very, very passionate about, and we'd like to show you this. For our average training programs, you can see that certainly we can't make your brain bigger. But if you work out in this way, similar to any external muscle that you can see, we wanted you to see like a real scan in terms of people that consistently work on this. That's why our classes for the self-awareness program are 2 weeks apart. That's why they're over a couple months, because it's based on the data, it's based on research. So you can see going from our first class to our second class, you can see how those connections, all these thoroughfares look bigger. It goes very much from Charlie Brown's Christmas tree to getting more connections. And you can see to the far right how it's a lot more difficult when you are going to the rainbow on a consistent basis, how you're less apt to fall prey to Alzheimer's and dementia because it's tougher for the plaque to get in. That's why, even though we are a pattern making machine, you would think, well, gosh, this is great. Now I have this perspective at whatever age. If you do not get off the brain couch and really get uncomfortable, how you know neuroplasticity is working is your second brain will tell you, your stomach. We have got to be the only training course, along with some of the other people in America that do this work, when somebody says, oh my gosh, I was so afraid and I worked through it. I was uncomfortable and I worked through it. I tried this and oh my gosh, the result was never as I have seen. Your second brain is certainly going to be that litmus test to let you know what's not in your filing cabinet. And then it's going to lead you down often a road to say, run, escape. This is where you use fight or flight. But what we're really going to challenge you to do is to lean into that not yet. And you can see just after 2 months, I mean, we know most New Year's resolutions are done like in 2 minutes. The difference with you committing to something like this, we all have strengths, we all have opportunities for growth, and you shouldn't do it for any other reason but a particular goal. I want to be less stressed out. I want to be a coaching leader. I mean, when you look at the Buffalo Bills, and if you truly listen to Sean McDermott, you will absolutely hear him talk about very growth mindset ideas. He'll say things like, we're not there yet. He'll very much talk about the group as more of a group. So these are the type of things and themes that we very much, you see play out within when you go to Wegmans, if you're in a geographic area that has that, from the perspective of, certainly listening to the Buffalo Bills and anything else that you do. I think, even listening to, the debate this evening, you're going to very much be able to identify who works from the threat region, who's trying to make you more primal or afraid, who's working in the reward region. These are the type of things that, I hate to say it, but often politicians know neuroscience. They know everything that goes into the dynamic and our human design, and they use it, not always in the most honorable of ways. And so we fall prey to it again we don't have these high levels of awareness in our human design and who we are as a person. So it's all really great stuff and important to know. So Kristen, any questions we should be addressing? Any comments you wanna highlight? We're in our last couple minutes.
No, I just put in the chat for them to, let me know if they have any questions. My email is in there as well currently, so if anybody needs that. And feel free to email if you don't want to ask a question here. I'm always happy to answer on email too.
Perfect. That sounds wonderful. Jean.
No questions that I see in my world either, but I'm happy to say that I'll be one of your instructors for both in-house EQ, as well as the virtual EQ.
Okay, that sounds super. Thank you so much, team, for spending this time with us. You are automatically, because you attended today, we will be sending you the details on our October webinar with our strategic partner, Heidi Reed. So that's going to be awesome and really exciting. So look forward to that. And again, certainly you know where to find us. And it's been a joy.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.